Okay, thank you, Lily, and thank you for showing up. And it's my old buddy, Freddie Roman. That's me, and that's Max Docelli, who is a comedian who broke in with Seinfeld and Larry David and Carol Leifler and Paul Reiser, Gilbert Gottfried, back in the late 1970s. And he also had the car, which is an important part of this story. Anyway, this is from 2009, when we're all on the cruise ship together, all performing. I'm not a comic. Max is a comic. He's been doing it on cruise ships for 40 years. And Freddie made all of his money from comedy based on the play, which some of you might have seen, called Catskills over Broadway. Did you like it?
Yes, great.
They liked it, Freddie. Anyway, Freddie Roman. Borscht Belt comic. He actually kind of grew up in the Borscht Belt because his uncle owned a hotel. And we were talking one day, and he says, you know, not everybody is cut out to be a stand-up comic. I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, take Soupy Sales, for instance. Where? Anyway, so, slow on the draw there. Anyway, so he says, you know, Soupy was great at improv. Soupy was great at sketches, but he was a lousy stand-up comedian. And Freddie loved him. Soupy, of course, his real name was Milton Suppman. And Freddie was the dean of the Friars at the Friars Club. And when Soupy died, Freddie made sure that the Friars Club paid for his funeral. Here are some comics. Billy Crystal, that guy in the middle, his name is Kaminsky or something. Did you ever hear of him? Yeah, Melvin Kaminsky. Ever hear of him? Wasn't he a has-been or something? And Jerry Seinfeld. Jewish comics, 1978. There was a story in Time magazine that claimed that 80% of all stand-up comics in the United States were Jewish. But Jews only made up 3% of the population. So why did Jews proliferate in comedy? Well, I don't know how much you believe in the psychologists, but there was one called Samuel Janis who told a meeting of the American Psychological Association, most comics have shrinks, that Jewish humor is born of depression and alienation from the general culture. For Jewish comedians, comedy is a defense mechanism to ward off aggression and hostility of others. Again, this guy Kaminsky once said, if they're laughing, how could they bludgeon you to death? Oh, that's a cousin of mine. And they were my two kids a long time ago. Do you recognize that guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's my cousin, Jerry Stiller, which means Ben is my cousin too. And he's named after Uncle Benny, who died in 1964. This is how depraved the Stiller family was. They were also all that big. He used to walk around with a tie. And on his tie, there was a tie clip. Big initials, BS, right in the middle of his tie. Jerry Stiller, who really made it on the Seinfeld show. He was struggling until then. 2013 survey from the Pew Research Center, Portrait of Jewish Americans, found that humor is one of the main qualities that 1 in 10, or 4 in 10, of the nation's 5.3 million religious and cultural Jews say is essential to Jewish identity. I know it is to my family because of the Stillers, and then on the other side of the family, Stella Adler. As my daughter says, we are part of the first family of Jewish entertainment with Stella Adler and Judy Holliday and the Stillers. I don't get no respect. Rodney Dangerfield. Rodney's one of these guys that you can either take or leave, right? But he was funny, rapid style, and all that other stuff. But he's there, and he's to the right, or your left, of a guy by the name of George Shultz. You ever hear of George Shultz? Who has heard of George Shultz?
Secretary of State, wasn't he?
No, he was a comic. And his line was, I get no respect. That was George Shultz. They were best friends, Rodney and George Shultz. According to Rodney Dangerfield, or Jacob Roy Cohen, the catchphrase of his act, I don't get no respect, came due to his rough childhood. Or did it? Well, there's my buddy Max Docelli and I. We're down in Boynton Beach, of course, and he's down there at the Boynton Beach Comedy Club giving the people a thistle of Jewish humor, even though he's Italian. And this is in 2018. And according to Max, who used to drive Rodney around and also sold him 5 jokes and also fixed his plumbing one night, I'll get into that in a minute. Jack Roy, the comic, became friendly with another comic by the name of George Schultz, who became a personal friend and a mentor to Jack Roy. Dangerfield claimed he had overheard monsters using the phrase during one of his shows and started using it. But I speak on cruise ships, and because I got that entree named Jerry Stiller, the comics become my friends, a lot of them. And well, the comics claim that when Schultz used to use it, and when he got off the road finally, which he did to open up Mr. Pips in Sheepshead Bay, which is recognized as the first comedy club back in 1962, he told Jack Roy, use the phrase. Well, Max used to drive Rodney around every once in a while. In fact, he performed at Dangerfield's. And he would ask every once in a while about, had you come up with your catchphrase? I'm looking for a catchphrase. And he would not answer. He always changed the subject. And like I said, Max played at Dangerfield and sold him jokes. Well, who is Rodney Dangerfield? Who is Rodney Dangerfield? Anybody know who Rodney Dangerfield is? He was a character on the Jack Benny Show. That's where he was. As far as Rodney was concerned about Jack Benny, he was an ace. He was a doll. And he says to me, Rodney, I'm cheap, and I'm 39, and that's my image. But your no respect thing, that's into the soul of everybody. Everybody can identify with that. Everybody gets cut off in traffic. Everybody gets stood up by a girl. Kids are rude to them, whatever. He says to me, every day something happens where people feel they didn't get respect. Audience didn't like Jacob or Jack Roy. One night, because he's constantly booed or heckled, whatever, he says to the club owner, before introducing me, give me another name. Introduce me as somebody else. Maybe they'll like me. Well, they do, or the guy does. He says, I'm going to call you Rodney Dangerfield. Character out of Jack Benny. The name stuck. He was an overnight success. He became a regular on the Ed Sullivan Show. And as his success grew, and he found other comics and launched their careers, including Jerry Seinfeld, Jim Carrey, Roseanne Barr, Sam Kinison, and Tim Allen. My favorite Rodney story was he was an aluminum siding salesman, and he's in Englewood, New Jersey. And he's trying to sell aluminum siding to this person, or these people in Englewood, and they have the Mike Douglas Show on TV. And guess who's performing on the Mike Douglas Show? And one of the people said, you look just like that guy on TV. No, that's not me. Oh, that's not me. That was him. Before there was Mort Saul, who was a Jewish satirist who was credited with making caustic political and social satire popular in stand-up comedy, often walking on stage holding just a rolled-up newspaper. Saul liked to riff on the headlines of the day and extended, improvised monologues. At a time when comedians tended to steer clear of politics, Saul took aim at politicians and was known to end his sets with the line, are there any groups here that I have not offended? Before there was Mort Saul, he would influence Lenny Bruce, who would take Saul's free-form style and cutting satire to crude new heights. Government reports show that the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, thought stand-up comic Mort Saul was a very sick man. Not that he wasn't spying on everybody, right? Having files on everyone. And that the feds kept close tabs on Saul's jokes about them, believing that he, and like-minded comedian Lenny Bruce, were receiving material from communistic sources. Well, before there was Lenny Bruce, And there's Lenny Bruce being busted. He was busted in 1964 because Cardinal Spellman of New York thought that a 9-year-old kid might walk into a comedy club at 2 in the morning, drink some beer, and be offended by dirty words. That's what happened, and he got the Manhattan DA, Frank Hogan, to go along with him. They sent 2 undercover cops in there. They busted Mort Saul for obscenity in New York in 1964. Anyway, in the late 1950s, he emerged as the leading proponent of what was called sick humor. The term referred to comics who stepped out beyond stock jokes to poke fun at the rigid conventions of American society. He denounced racists, bigots, performed routines on social taboos, which included sexual practice, drugs, alcohol use, and specific words, the 7 dirty words that George Carlin would make famous in polite society. He became famous for using forbidden language. He was often arrested for public obscenity. Before there was Jon Stewart. I take everybody in here knows who Jon Stewart is from The Daily Show, or his run at The Daily Show. The most trusted name in fake news. Screamed out an NPR website story on him. And he expressed his opinions nightly on The Daily Show, which was to appeal to 18 to 34-year-olds. He had quick wit, biting satire, and taking the once obscure fake news show, fake news, I can't help but laugh at that, anyway, and made it an influential voice in American humor in politics. So before there was Mort Saul, before there was Lenny Bruce, before there was Jon Stewart, there were these guys. Wait, I got an applause there. You're a Three Stooges fan? You like that? Certainly. Anyway, the guy in the middle, of course, is Moe Howard, and guess who he's playing? Adolf Hitler. And of course, that's Goebbels, Larry Fine, holding up the cheer sign. The Three Stooges, Moe Howard, his brother Jerome or Curly, Larry Fine, and the Columbia studio boss, Harry Cohn, were Jewish. The Stooges did shorts and stage shows, but they were the first Jewish satirical artists. You Nazi Spy was released in January 1940. It was the second film devoted to the Nazis. The first was in 1939 by the Warner Brothers, but it was a political spy thriller featuring or starring somebody you probably know, Emmanuel Goldberg. No? Edward G. Robinson? There you go. And it was done by the Warner Brothers. But that short is significant because it came at a time when many Hollywood studios were trying to placate Nazi Germany, even then bowing to German pressure to sanitize films that might even slightly be critical of the Third Reich. So it's Moe Howard, it's Jerome Howard, or Curly, and Larry Fine, who are the original satire comics. And this is it. Take a look. There they are. What do they remind you of? The short includes Moe as a Hitler lookalike, including an on-again, off-again toothbrush mustache and uniform. Curly is Field Marshal Gallstone, a take on Hermann Göring, with a touch of Mussolini thrown in for good measure, and Larry is the Minister of Propaganda. He is playing Joseph Goebbels. And it would not be the only time they would do this in 1940. The three-sport national emblem, snakes intertwined to form a backward swastika. Their country, Moronica, has as its slogan, Moronica for Morons, a direct parody of Nazi Germany's Germany for Germans. They repeatedly yelled, Heil. So they did 3 short stags here. What is the route to become a stand-up comic or a comedy star? Well, in the old days, it used to be vaudeville, burlesque, film, radio stars. And can you make out who those 4 guys are? Yeah, there is Zeppo, there is Groucho, there is Harpo, and there is Chico. W.C. Fields once said of the Marx Brothers, they were the only act he couldn't follow live on stage. He is known to have appeared with them just once on the same bill at the Orpheum Theater in Columbus in January 1950. At the time, the Marx Brothers were touring Home Again, and it didn't take W.C. Fields long to realize how his quiet comedy juggling act was faring against the anarchy of the Marxists. You know, in the 1950s, when there was the Red Scare, they talked about how people were glorifying Marxism in the 1950s. I think these guys started glorifying Marxism in the 19-teens, except it was a different Marxist, Karl Marx. So W.C. Fields couldn't compete with them. Fields later wrote of the engagement and the Marxists. They sang, they danced, they played hard, kidded in a zany style. Never saw so much nepotism or hilarious laughter in one act in my life. The only act I could never follow. I told my manager I broke my wrist and quit. And there they are again in their movie and stage garb, Chico and Harpo, and Zeppo and Groucho and Harpo. For Marx Brothers, Lenin, Chico. He was a piano-playing con artist, Adolf, who then changed his name after the Nazis to Arthur. Harpo, non-talking prankster who could play the harp. Julius Henry Marx, Groucho. He was a quick-talking wise guy. And Herbert, Zeppo, was straight arrow. By the way, Zeppo invented a heart device in the 1930s used to help people who had heart problems. He would leave the act in the 1930s. He would become an agent along with his brother Milton, who was named Gummo. So there are the Marx Brothers. By the 1920s, the brothers were one of the most popular acts in vaudeville. While they were popular with audiences, they weren't exactly all that popular with the vaudeville owners and promoters because they were always pulling pranks and doing things against them. 1923, the show, I'll Say She Is, premiered in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And for about a year, they honed the show into a well-oiled machine, and they hit Broadway on May 19, 1924. They were an instant smash. In 1925, Harpo and Zeppo got onto the silver screen, perfect for Harpo because there was no speaking in those days. And then the films came. There were 40,000 working vaudevillians at the height of the business, but only a few were worthy of hitting Broadway. Broadway producers felt their audiences would not pay the higher ticket prices for an act that they had seen in a 25-cent vaudeville show. The Marx Brothers jumped to Broadway and then films. Some of the films they made, my favorite, Duck Soup, which is about, I don't know, fascism, I suppose. Horse Feathers, which when I give to talks about the business and politics of sports, tell my students, or the people who are my victims when my talk, to go watch that film, because nothing has changed in college sports since the 1930s about people getting paid. Night at the Opera, they would do radio, and Groucho made it big on TV with the show. You bet your life, the duck will come down, say the secret word, and you win $100. The talking movies killed vaudeville, according to Groucho. Recognize that guy?
Jack Benny.
That's who that is. Benny Kebelsky, Jack Benny, the vaudeville burlesque film radio stars. Achieving national fame in vaudeville was quite a feat. 40,000 vaudevillians, right? It didn't happen to many people, but it did for Benny Kebelsky of Waukegan, Illinois, or Benny K. Benny, or finally Jack Benny. And he would never lack for bookings. He was always hired on the big-time vaudeville circuits. He toured back and forth across America and Canada, and yeah, he had success, depending on how sophisticated his audiences were. Probably didn't do as well in Iowa as, say, in Chicago. He was, of his day, the smart young comedian. I was talking to some comedians back in about 10 years ago, when they were breaking in the 80s, and they said the smart young comedians of the late 1970s, Jerry Seinfeld, Larry David. except Larry David was a lousy stand-up. But if you were a smart young comic, you were going to get ahead. And there it is. How many of you listened? I still listen to these shows, because these shows are hysterical. How many of you watched the show, the Jack Benny Show? I like the radio shows better, simply because I grew up in radio. That's my background. And radio is the theater of the imagination. You had to imagine everything. When you saw them on TV, they were old. Jack was, when he started on TV, 56 years old. But you can't tell how old they are on radio. This is the gang. Dennis Day is there, and Rochester, and that's Phil Harris, and there's Mary, and there's Jack, and there's Don, and there's Bugs Bunny, or Daffy Duck, or Yosemite Sam, Mel Blanc. 1932, vaudeville's in the death spiral. The Great Depression. Herbert Hoover decides he's going to put a 10% seat tax on vaudeville, which kills vaudeville, nearly kills Major League Baseball and the National Football League, because he put this amusement tax on as a way to raise money. Benny became the #1 comedian in radio history. He had to do two 30-minute segments of a brand new material for each week. Couldn't do that. Really couldn't do that. He had enough with vaudeville, but in vaudeville, you would stop in the town once a year and you'd come back the next year and people forgot your act. So he had to do more than old jokes. So on the show, they started creating a conversation between speakers on the show. And they would basically create the first sitcom. Not on TV, but on radio, situation comedy. He was a mainstay in the golden age of radio. The show would last until 1955. At that point, radio was transforming into rock and roll music on the AM band and getting rid of all of the serials and the soap operas and all the other shows. Just couldn't compete with TV. Benny had a TV show, yes?
By the way, on Comcast Channel 8, I think it's
Locally here.
7 in the morning,
Yeah.
The Jack Benny shows, two of the shows are on.
Yeah, 2 shows, yeah. There are packages all over the place.
And you tell
With the-
people, well, I have a kid just a little bit older than Millie, and they don't know who Jack Benny is.
I can tell you a story about Max. Max was with a comedian one day, a young comedian,
How could he do that?
and he asked, who are your influences? And the guy said, Richard Pryor, George Carlin, those people. He said, did you ever hear Jack Benny? No. He's been dead 48 years. Anyway, Burns and Allen, Nathaniel Burbell. Say goodnight, Gracie.
Good night.
Good night? No, we still got time. We're not saying good night quite yet. George Burns wrote most of the material for the act. Initially, he comes on in the act as the silly man, and Gracie Allen is the straight woman. She's getting more laughs as the straight woman than George as the silly man. So anyway, he makes a change, and she becomes a silly woman. At the end of the radio show, George would say to Gracie, say goodnight, Gracie, and what would her line be?
Good night, Gracie.
Good night, Gracie. Rowan and Martin's Laughing in the 1960s would see Dan Rowan use the line, say goodnight, Dick. A whole bunch of celebrities would say goodnight, Dick. And then at the end of the show, Dick Martin would say, goodnight, Dick. And the show was over, an ode to Burns and Allen. The funniest man ever, according to Melvin Kaminsky, was Harry Ritz. Harry Ritz? Nobody knows who Harry Ritz is? Nobody?
George Jeffs.
The Ritz brothers. Somebody knew. In the 1970s, Esquire published a feature, said Mel Brooks says this is the funniest man in the world. As far as I'm concerned, says Mel Brooks, Harry Ritz was the funniest man ever. His craziness and his freedom were unmatched. There was no intellectualizing with him. You just hope there were no pointy objects in the room when he was working, because you were down on the floor, spitting, out of control, laughing your brains out. Harry Ritz always put me away always.
Wait, what year was that?
30s and the 40s. Okay, Sid Caesar. How many of you know who Sid Caesar is? We all know who Show of Shows, right? This man gave comedy a whole new dimension. Harry was the greatest innovator. His energy and sensibility opened things up for all of us. He had to be the funniest man of all time. Jerry Lewis, who stole his act from everybody in the Borscht Belt, by the way. He just did it better than everybody else. Jerry Lewis said, Harry was the teacher. He had the extraordinary ability to deny himself dignity on stage. Harry taught us that the only thing that mattered was getting a laugh, whether you did it with a camel or two rabbis humping a road map. Harry spawned all of us. We begged, borrowed, and stole from him. At least he's honest, he stole from Harry Ritz. Every one of us. Without him, we wouldn't be here. There they are, the Ritz brothers, putting on the Ritz. The recognition Harry did receive as the top banana among the three Ritz brothers was relatively scant and short-lived. During his heyday in the late 1930s and the 40s, his particular brand of comedy was not thought of as art. And when it came to list the immortals of the period, no one thought to include Harry's name among them. Today, it is very difficult to find anybody under 40, how about this group, who has ever heard of him. Under 90, yes. Impressionist Will Jordan pointed out, you remember Will Jordan?
Yes.
Will Jordan did his Ed Sullivan.
Oh, yeah.
By the way, Jerry Stiller said when Ed Sullivan went like that, that meant he was looking at what time it was to make sure the acts continued on time. Jerry and Ann were on the show 36 times. But Will Jordan pointed out the shticks others borrowed from Harry. Danny Kaye's Russian gibberish. Remember that?
Yeah.
Milton Berle's way of walking on his ankles. Jerry Lewis' cross-eyed and dumb look. Jackie Gleason's And Away We Go walk. Everyone's German professor. The Ritz brothers were popular, but not as cherished or revered as the Marx brothers. They were considered too lowbrow. The Ritz brothers' brand of slapstick didn't translate into future generations like the Three Stooges. Three Stooges still have some popularity. The Ritz brothers have zero. The vaudeville burlesque film radio stars. Fanny Brice. Fanny Brice. She built her career on a Yiddish accent and a flair for zany parody. She appeared in burlesque and vaudeville, drama and film, and musical reviews. She was in 9 Ziegfeld Follies between 1910 and 1936. But she would make it big with one sketch. A terrible toddler by the name of Baby Snooks. And she delighted audiences with her thoroughly believable impression, complete with a hair ribbon, starched pinafore, ankle socks, Mary Janes. Snooks would lead Fanny Brice to stardom on radio. She was not forgotten. In the early 1960s, there were some Broadway entrepreneurs who said, hey, let's do a story on Fanny Brice's life. We're going to call it Funny Girl. Anybody ever hear of Funny Girl in here? Does that mean yes?
Yes.
Anyway, so the play opens in 1964 and Barbra Streisand is the lead. Except initially the producer said, let's get Mary Martin. And Mary Martin said, don't you need a Jewish girl for this? They're never going to believe me. Well, Barbra Streisand was the 6th choice of the producers. 6th choice. Her stand-in was Lainie Kazan, and when I was 13 years old, I had a crush on Lainie Kazan. Until a New York Times writer by the name of George Vesey said to me one day, he went to Hofstra, he said, you know, I was a classmate of Lainie Kazan. I said, and what's that mean? He says, keep it as a fantasy. George wrote the book Coal Miner's Daughter, which became the movie Coal Miner's Daughter. Anyway, so there has been a revival of Funny Girl on Broadway from last year. The founders of modern stand-up comedy include Jack Benny, George Burns, Milton Berle. They all came from vaudeville. and they spoke directly to the audiences themselves in front of a curtain, performing at what was known as In One. I played the side lounge in Cutchers. I gave talks in Cutchers, and that was the side lounge. That wasn't the big hall. But let's talk about the big hall, which I never did in Cutchers. Borscht Belt, style of Jewish comedy. That was I don't have to tell you where the Borscht Belt was, do I?
No.
Everybody in here, well, Lily might not know where the Borscht Belt is. You do know where the Borscht Belt is. Okay, it doesn't exist anymore.
We taught her how to read.
Oh, you taught her how to read, okay. So it was there from actually the 19-teens, because Gertrude Berg's father had a resort in 1912 in the Berkshires through the 1970s, because the Jews couldn't go to other resorts. Go ahead, you don't have to raise your hand, just talk. We're all friends here.
They just broke ground
On the museum the other day. I know a woman who went to the other high school in Rockland County in Ramapo, Robin Cohen Kaufman, who was part of that group to get that museum done. Kosher comedy, Benny Bell. He did Shaving Cream. I'm prohibited from playing Shaving Cream to my 3-year-old granddaughter by my wife and by friends of mine. You cannot play that for her. He stepped in Shaving Cream. Anyway, Benny Bell. Kosher comedy, Yiddish language, Benny Bell. Families would stay at such a resort for a month or more in the summer. The husbands would work in the city during the week and drive up there on weekends, and according to people like Mildred Kutcher, she couldn't tell me what was going on. Mildred was the matriarch of Kutcher's, but she said that she had some steamy stories to tell, but she never did. There was a constant need to develop fresh material, since you'd be performing in front of the same audience every couple of weeks, or you would do what Myron Cohn did. He would start out at one place, tip the band leader $10, bail out after 45 minutes, got in his car, get to the next one on the other side of the county for a 10 o'clock show, tip the guy $10, get off early to get to the midnight show in the middle of the Borscht Belt, and then he'd go home to New Hempstead Road in Rockland County. This would transform into stand-up routines of 40 minutes. Here are the comics, because I'm not going through every comic, but here are the comics that performed in the Borscht Belt. Jackie Mason. I once saw him on 57th Street in front of the Carnegie Towers. And I'm telling my wife, I said, there's Jackie Mason. He's all smiles. I said, I just walked away, and he was like, oh. Somebody recognized me and didn't ask for an autograph or a picture. George Burroughs. This guy Kaminsky keeps coming up. Did you ever hear of him? He goes by the name of Mel Brooks. Did he ever do anything? Mel Brooks?
Yes.
Never, okay. Rodney Dangerfield, Don Rickles, Woody Allen, Buddy Hackett, Carl Reiner, Sid Caesar, Lenny Bruce, Joan Rivers, Milton Berle, Jerry Lewis, Joey Bishop, Henny Youngman, Zero Mostel, Phil Silvers, Myron, Howie Mandel, and Jerry Seinfeld are probably the last two of the most famous comics, when actually he became an actor, Howie Mandel, and now a game show guru, right? Are probably the last two of the Borscht Belt comics. Myron, Schwata salesman, had land on the Palisades Park, where the Palisades Parkway, they need the land for it, as Freddie told me. Sold the land, never had to sell any more schmatas again. Well, the Borscht Belt comics were, they were brash, filled with gags, and they talked about bossy mother-in-laws, and I had a bossy mother-in-law as well. One day I was giving a talk, and she's singing in the back, just like that. Cutthroat, the henpecked husband. But before there was Don Rickles, there was somebody else. It was Jackie Leonard, right? He wasn't the first insult comic. The tradition dated back to the Catskills with the likes of Jackie Leonard, who once introduced Rickles as a man who's been doing my act for 12 years now. Rickles softened the edges of the insult art, delivering his lines with frantic desperation that hinted at his own frayed bundle of insecurities, you hockey puck. My whole act is attitude. The attitude makes the jokes. Like I'm talking to you now. I'm a little bit fed up with the whole thing. This guy's back again, Kaminsky, the 2,000-year-old man. How many of you remember the 2,000-year-old man? He knew Jesus, you know. Oh, never paid for anything. It was created by Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks during their show of shows, first publicly performed in the 1960s. Kaminsky played a 2,000-year-old man interviewed by Reiner in a series of comedy routines that turned into a collection of records performed on TV. He also wrote something called The Producers. Max, he's wearing a dress. And parts of Blazing Saddles. He created the bean scene in Blazing Saddles. Carl Reiner created the Dick Van Dyke Show. The character Buddy Sorrell, played by Maureen Amsterdam in that show, is based on Mel Brooks. Women had a difficult time at being comics. Well, you can see why. It's Jerry Lewis. You know, you got to remember, Jerry Lewis really hit the big time in 1946. And that's when comedy clubs were run by, you know, people like that. And it was a totally male world. So, in 2000, he's in Colorado. And he's asked by Martin Short, what do you think of Lucille Ball? His response, a woman doing comedy doesn't offend me. What sets me back a bit? I, as a viewer, have trouble with it. I think of her as a producing machine that brings babies into the world. He's 75 when he said that. 13 years later, he had another bar mitzvah. He's 88, right? 13 years later. At the Cannes Film Festival. He's asked about women comics, and he says, it bothers me. I cannot sit and watch a lady diminish her qualities to the lowest common denominator. I just can't do that. But he has to change his mind in 2014. He describes Lucille Ball as brilliant and called Carol Burnett the greatest female entrepreneur of comedy. Changes his mind at 89. But being a comic is a very tough life. Oh, that's John Lovitz. Remember him?
Yes.
That's him. We were at a Charles Grodin thing. Charles invited me and my wife. He was doing a treatment for a play, and Lovitz all of a sudden sitting next to me, and we were striking up a conversation. Upon the passing of Jerry Lewis, John Lovitz tweeted, Jerry Lewis, oi, another comic legend gone. What an amazing talent and a philanthropist. A long, well-lived life. Well, he wasn't born very far from here. How many of you have roots in Newark? What I find is I go to Millburn and Springfield and Westfield and Union. Everybody came from Newark there.
Everybody came from Patterson.
Patterson, okay. So you're Patterson, they were from, so you only moved 6 miles too. Anyway, so he was born in Newark to Russian Jewish parents. His father, Daniel Levitch, was a master of ceremonies and vaudeville entertainer who used the name Dammy Lewis. His mother, Rachel Nee Brodsky, was a piano player for a radio station. And he started performing at 5 in the Catskills alongside his parents. He literally grew up in a truck. So by 15, he developed his record act, which he exaggerately mimicked the lyrics to songs on the photograph. And of course, here's where he makes it big. This is where I get to steal from other talks, because I use this for Italian-American talk. Well, I could use this for Jewish talk. Lewis and Martin were introduced on a New York City street, March 1945. They became friends. They performed individually at the Glass Hat Club in Manhattan and would heckle each other. In late July 1946, Jerry was booked to appear at the Club 500 in Atlantic City. A singer by the name of Jack Randall was supposed to be there, but he never showed up. Recalling the times he goofed around with Dean, Jerry went to the club's owner, Paul Skinny D'Amato, and told him, hey, hire Dean. We fool around on stage. We do funny stuff together. Well, Dean is unemployed at the time, so he flies in. And it's July 25th, 1946. Dean sang some songs, went off stage. Jerry did the record act, and Skinny D'Amato wants to know, where's the funny? You said you're going to be funny. Where's the funny? Martin and Lewis. So they're stuck for an answer. And he says, there better be some funny stuff in the next show, or else. What could there or else be? Thrown into the Atlantic Ocean? So they needed the gig, and they knew they had to produce, and they're starving. They go back to the dressing room. They tell the club's busboy, bring them pastrami sandwiches and some sodas, and Jerry starts furiously writing down on the wrapper what they're going to do in the next show. He had an idea in his mind for months, called it Sex and Slapstick. His idea was to pair up a handsome, confident man with, as he put it, a monkey. The rest is history. It was the monkey and the organ grinder. They would split up on July 25th, 1956, 10 years to the date. They were the biggest act in showbiz in the 1940s and 50s. Martin started to feel that Lewis was exerting too much control over their work and wanted to go back to a solo career. Lewis, who idolized Martin, felt betrayed, but he said, I broke up the act in 2002. Dean hurt desperately, and I felt guilty of not seeing it earlier. They went on. I think Dean had a better career than Jerry, but that's me. Nutty Professor, Julius Kelp. Dean Martin appeared in movies, played Las Vegas, has a successful TV show. Jerry continued to make movies. He had a bomb for a TV show. And he starred in films. But he's created with inventing Video Assist, a device used in movie production today and often referred to as Video Village. He created closed-circuit television system to facilitate motion picture production. And of course, he was on the Labor Day telethon every year, and he reconciled with Dean Martin on the 1976 telethon. Have you been working lately? Listen, this is Sinatra. I have a friend who loves what you do every year and who just wants to come out. Could you send my friend out, please? Here they are, folks. Being Sinatra, Mike in his right hand, left arm draped on Sherry's shoulder. Standing ovation lasted about a minute. They were never close afterwards, but they were respectful and basically spoke to each other every once in a while. Many of you ever heard of her, Jean Carroll? Jean Carroll. How many? Raise your hands. 1, 2. Jean Carroll. Not E. Jean Carroll, who's going on trial on April 27th. That's a different Jean Carroll. Comedian. And she's good looking. Think of all the comedians who came after her. Phyllis Diller, Joan Rivers, Tony Fields. She's good looking. She's born Selig Zegman in 1911, moves to the States in 1912. Starts out in vaudeville, part of a team, Buddy Howe and Jean Carroll. But he goes into World War II, into the military, and he says, go out on stage. Do it. Go out on stage. And she does. He became her manager. Her first television appearance was Ed Sullivan's Toast to the Town in 1948. She appeared on Sullivan's show 20 times. More than 20 times. And Lily Tomlin and Joan Rivers borrowed from her. She had her own TV show about a comic in her domestic life. It sounds like another show that was highly popular in the 1990s called Seinfeld. Yes? But the show only lasted about 11 episodes. It was on a very weak network, Paramount's ABC. It was called Take It From Me. They couldn't find the sponsor, and the show was gone by January 1954. But she was a star, big-time star. The nation's #1 comedian, Jean Carroll, currently Paramount. And you might have heard of Perry Como's Chesterfield Supper Club, or Perry Como. Everybody's heard of Perry Como, right? She was on that. Sullivan's Toast to the Town. Another guy by the name of Milton Berlinger, the Texaco Star Theater. She's on there. And the Cavalcade of Stars, which was on Dumont, that starred a Newark-based comedian by the name of Jackie Gleason. Ever hear of him? Yes. So she's big time. She's big time. She wrote stuff about everyday material, clothing, shopping, social life, family, but she's a rarity. Other than Moms Mabley, she's one of the few women who's doing a solo stand-up. And that was, remember what Jerry Lewis said, it's no place for a woman to be. Here she is. She's got a stool. She's got a glass of water. She's on stage. She has evening dress, shimmering evening dress, diamonds in the mane, but her monologue is about, well, spouse, children, confuse the audience. How could that be? She's a lone woman on stage, bare on stage, telling stories. That was not a big deal back in those days. She succeeded. She set the stage for women like Phyllis Diller and Joan Rivers. It's Bob Bloch. He passed away last year at the age of 94. Anybody ever have Wilmecco Home Theater back in the day? Well, he invented that. But more importantly, Bob Bloch had a comedy club in Milwaukee in the late 50s and early 60s. That's Frank Carney, my friend, who's involved in cable television in the early days of cable TV. So Bob befriended Henny Youngman and also Maury Amstead. Didn't like Milton Berle because he wanted clean comedy and Milton Berle did blue. But Bob Bloch was good friends with Henny Youngman. And he told me Henny Youngman died a bitter man. How many of you remember Henny Youngman? Take my wife, please. Anyway, there were 44,000 TV sets in the United States in 1947. And Henny Youngman has an opportunity to host a TV show called the Texaco Star Theater. But he's going to audition for it. But there's a conflict. He's also supposed to be in London to give a royal performance before the Queen Mother and Princess Elizabeth, after all. You know? So his agent tells him, look, you're going to make the decision. I'm not going to make this decision for you. You may never, ever again get a chance to be on the royal show. There are only 44,000 TV sets in use. By the way, if that was you, what would you have done? Would you do the royal show or would you do the TV show?
TV show.
How many would you have done the TV show? Okay. Only 44,000 TVs though.
That's 1947.
This is 47. Well, Henny did the royal show. You know, Berle tried out for the Texaco Star Theater. Got the gig. Henry became bitter about his faith. Berle thrived. You can trust your card to the man who wears the star. And there is Uncle Mel. Texaco Star Theater drove sales of TV sets from 500,000 in 1948 to 30 million when the show ended. It was also the highest rated TV show, 50-51 for a season, which Nielsen used ratings. Your show of shows. Could you do your show of shows today? No. Reason why? Money. You couldn't pay these people. Because look at the people. Well, it was on from 50 to 54, but look at the people who wrote for that show. This guy Brooks keeps coming up. Yeah, I don't know. He just keeps coming up. Neil Simon, Danny Simon, Mel Tonkin, Lucille Kalin, Selma Diamond, Joseph Stein, Michael Stewart, Tony Webster, the only Gentile in the crowd, Carl Reiner, Larry Gelbart, Woody Allen. How could you pay them? You couldn't pay them. Laughter on the 23rd Floor, all about that show by Neil Simon. Carl Reiner said the time that he spent on your show of shows was the inspiration for the Dick Van Dyke Show. The 1982 movie, My Favorite Year, produced by Mel Brooks, inspired by that show. Laughter on the 23rd Floor, written by Neil Simon. The play, also inspired by that show. Woody Allen. He was a stand-up comic in the 1960s before he became a filmmaker. His routines included everything from Brooklyn and Marriage to a vodka ad and The Moose, a memorable bit about shooting a moose and the repercussions he faced from doing so. His contemporaries included Joe Malinsky. Okay, there is no in-between with Joe Malinsky. You either loved her or hated her, right? Anybody just, she's okay, I don't like her, in between? None. There was one guy who said, you can take her or leave her. That's it, one. That's done. And in the mid-1960s, she's pushing the boundaries of taste, drawing respect from fellow stand-up comics in the largely dominated male field. But if she gave a bad performance, she's out the door. If a guy gives a bad performance, go home, work on it. We'll give you a few more days, work on it. Her audiences, some of them found her grating. Imagine that, she was grating. And Joe Malinsky's parents said their daughter was a failure, childless, divorced, unable to find steady work in a respectable profession. Hey Max, is this a respectable profession? What, we're comedians, of course not. She didn't like the Catskill shtick. She was looking for something else, and she found it in Lenny Bruce, who in 1964 was arrested in Manhattan, and George Pataki, the governor, gave him posthumous pardon in 2003. And there is Lenny Bruce. And he paved the way for future outspoken counterculture comics, and she took it. And she went from canned and scripted performances to open discussions of her private life, ranging from an abusive childhood to making fun of her looks and her lack of domestic abilities. Here's Johnny. Dun, 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 dun. Two men can make or break your career in the 1960s, Sullivan and Johnny. On February 17, 1965, she's on the air with Johnny. Johnny says to her, "You're going to be a star." She was in the circuit with Lenny Bruce, and Woody Allen, and Richard Pryor, and Carlin, and Dick Cavett. And she thought they were her friends, but she felt never included because she was a girl. She started to make TV appearances on Sullivan, Mike Douglas, Dick Cavett, Girl Talk with Virginia Graham. Wrote material for Topio Gigio. Oh, you know she was handicapped, right?
No.
You didn't know she was handicapped? Oh. Well, I read it in the New York Times, so it must be true. I read it in the newspaper, so it had to be true. New York Times Review, 1965. Joan Rivers, a comedian of ripening promise, who opened at midweek for a 2-week run at the bitter end, is an unusually bright girl who's overcoming the handicap of a woman comic, looks pretty and blonde and bright, and yet manages to make people laugh. Wait, if you're blonde, you can't make people laugh? If you're bright, you can't make people laugh? Anyway, she becomes the permanent guest host of the Tonight Show. And she refers to Johnny Carson as, I'm Johnny Carson's daughter. But the end comes soon. There is the feud. Johnny Carson never spoke to his former Tonight Show protege when she left for her own show. Started on Fox on October 9th, 1986. Johnny was the one person who said, yes, she has talent. Yes, she is funny. He was the first person in power who respected what I was doing and realized what I could become. He handed me my career. She continued that she took the Fox offer because she was only offered a year extension by NBC when Carson signed a 2-year extension, and it was felt that Johnny was going to quit after 25 years in 1987. She was not on the list of replacing Johnny permanently. First person I called was Johnny, and he hung up on me. Never spoke to me again. Could never figure it out. I'd see him in the restaurant, go over and say hello. Wouldn't talk to me. Well, she was blacklisted from The Tonight Show from 1986 until 2014. 28 years. Jay Leno, hey, out of respect for Johnny, she's not coming on. Conan O'Brien, the same thing. Jimmy Fallon had her on his first show, March 2014. It's a guy named Wayne Cotter. Wayne Cotter is a stand-up comedian. He's also been on TV. He's been on Politically Incorrect. Lives in Delaware, has a comedy club in Philadelphia. He grew up in Riverdale, in the Bronx. So he made it big when he did a set for Carson, and Carson invited him to sit next to him. That's how you make it big. It took about 10 years for him to get onto Carson. This brings me Elaine Boosler. Okay, how many of you like Elaine Boosler? Oh, okay, well, you know. Nice woman. I know a guy by the name of Brian Bradley, who is an actor and a comedian, was on the Seinfeld show. He said, Elaine Boosler is one of the nicest people you will ever want to meet. She starred in the early 1970s. She was a waitress at the Improv in Manhattan. And her jokes were about her experiences as a single heterosexual woman and a comedian, and the impossible expectation of both. One joke: men want you to scream, "You're the best," while swearing you've never done this with anybody before. What does that mean? So she gets on the Tonight Show after a bunch of years. By 1977, Johnny's not there. Helen Reddy is the host, and she works out. So they invite her back when Johnny's on, and they tell her, you got to use hacky self-depreciation material. She says no. She goes on. Carson is fuming, and reportedly told his comedy booker, I never want to see that waitress on my show again. Well, she's floundering for a bunch of years. 1985, she puts all her money into a TV special called Elaine Boozler, Party of One. Submits it to Showtime, but Showtime doesn't touch it. There's new management at Showtime the next year. A wife of one of the new people at Showtime said, you better have her on or else. The special was an immediate success. She would go on to do 3 more specials for Showtime over the next 5 years. Roseanne Barr and Johnny. Well, she hit it big. She was kind of the successor to Tony Fields. She joked about her status, domestic goddess. She wasn't a housewife. She's fat. I thought I'd point that out, and debuted an impression of Barbra Streisand. Johnny invites her to the couch. Watching that night are Hollywood producers, Marcy Carsey and Tom Werner. And they're looking to do a series about a working mother, and from that appearance, she gets to do that. Roseanne appears on October, or the show, Roseanne premiered on October 18th, 1988. Here are the 5 dirtiest women, the 5 absolutely dirtiest women in comedy. So dirty they couldn't even play the Borscht Belt. Patsy Abbott. Nobody had party records that you stored so nobody else knew you had them? Well, she recorded 2 albums, Suck Up Your Behind and Have I Had You Before? Her nightclub act, she was brassy, she was sexual, she pushed back on the culture which insisted that women's roles were solely as demure mothers and housekeepers. On her Yiddish songs, Goldie Schwartz was her name, when she sang about domestic matters, the point was scatological, sexual, or simply to make a gratuitous Yiddish-English vulgar pun. Belle Barth. You heard of Belle Barth?
Oh, yeah.
The customer comes first. I could blow the whole network with 1 word, uncensored. Annabelle Salzman. She inspired Bette Midler. She avoided trouble with the law except in Miami Beach in 1952 because the people that busted the place knew Yiddish. It was Miami Beach after all. Where else are Jews going to go in Miami Beach but to a comedy club in 1952? But she would deliver some of her most wicked punchlines in Yiddish. Now, she was legit. She was on vaudeville. She did impressions of Sophie Tucker and Al Jolson, Gypsy Rose Lee, but she decided to become a raunchy stand-up comic because that was emerging in the 1950s. She recorded a number of albums, including If I Embarrass You, Tell Your Friends. She performed in New York, Miami, Las Vegas, Los Angeles. Sometimes she's too drunk to tone down her act, and she got busted like she did in Miami Beach before a bunch of Jews in 1952. She had to pay a $25 fine. Ruth Wallace, her greatest hits album, simply called Boobs. Boobs. Ruth Shirley Wall. She too was legit. She sang with Isham Jones and Benny Goodman. But she gave that all up in the 1940s because she did satirical songs with double entendres that she wrote herself. Once she was going to Australia, has all of her records. Customs agent seized it. It's a big news story. And more people came out to see her than she ever expected. My old Facebook pal, Rusty Warren, Knockers Up. Anybody ever hear of Knockers Up? Knockers Up, Knockers Up. Well, Eileen Goldman. She's considered too dirty for radio and TV. She did Knockers Up in 1960, which was kind of a women's liberation song. Without radio exposure, without TV exposure, only club exposure, over 3 years, Knockers Up sold 4 million copies. Party records, considered too vulgar to be on radio. Oh, Eileen Goldman, she was legit. She graduated in 1954 at the New England Conservatory of Music. She gave concerts in the area, and her musical mentor was Arthur Fiedler. Remember him? Yeah. Conductor of the Boston Pops. Pearl Williams, she's doing What Comes Naturally. I don't think that's the Irving Berlin song now. One night, 1952, a heckler was constantly telling her, get off the stage, your jokes are horrible, and she said to him, oh, go off. Audience howled. She had a new career. She released 9 best-selling party records during her career. Patsy Abbott had her own club, Have I Had You Before? These women were not allowed to play the Catskills. They were too filthy. Even though Buddy Hackett or the vulgar Tubby Boots were every bit filthy-minded as Barth, Williams, and Abbott, but they were not welcome. They played in Miami Beach, New York, Toronto, the late-night slot, where the crowds were drunker, rowdier, and more open to have a good time. Patsy Abbott had her own club called Patsy's Place in Miami. Barth and Williams played smaller rooms at noted hotels like the Fontainebleau. Anybody ever go to the Fontainebleau? It's condos now. It's condos. Or New York nightclubs that were stringed below Latin Quarter or El Morocco. She was famous enough, Barth, that she actually played Carnegie Hall. Too New York, too Jewish. Seinfeld almost never made it to TV. Screened for about 24 NBC executives. Most laughed, but one of them, Brendan Tartikoff, wasn't sold. He said it was too New York, too Jewish. Before its TV airing, it was tested before 400 households and was given extremely negative reviews. Warren Littlefield, second in command at NBC's entertainment division, recalled that in the history of pilot reports, Seinfeld had to be one of the worst ever. It aired on July 5th, 1989. Didn't do well, but came in second in its time slot. TV critics liked it, but NBC did not pick it up for 89-90. Show was different, said Preston Beckman, who was the head of NBC's ratings research at the time. No one had ever seen anything like it. It wasn't unusual for poorly tested shows to get on the air, but very rare that it became a big hit. Mr. Saturday Night, Billy Crystal. My interactions with him have not been good, but that's okay. Happens. The Borscht Belt is fondly remembered by comics. Billy Crystal returned to the character of stand-up comedy or comedian Buddy Young Jr., the guy he portrayed in the movie Mr. Saturday Night, in a Broadway run in 2021 and 22. He co-wrote, directed, and starred in the film comedy about a Borscht Belt comedian whose abrasive ego eclipses his success and alienates his family.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Do you not want to share why you...
No, it's just, you know, it's just things he said. That's all. That's all. That's all.
Brought it up, I thought.
Well, you know, it's just, you know, it's just, yeah, he was abrasive and has a big ego. Okay? He made his Broadway debut at the age of 74 after a long career in TVs and movies. Amy Schumer, Sarah Silverman, Anti-Semites Today. These are all comics, and this is a troupe that does shows about anti-Semitism and what to do with it. Jewish comedians are taking on hate on stage and social media. In 2022, 2 weeks after a Trump-supported heckler threw a beer can at Ariel Elias at a club in New Jersey over her politics, a video of the incident went viral, and she made her network television debut on Jimmy Kimmel's ABC Late Night Show. Jewish comedians now debate what kind of jokes about Jews are acceptable and what crosses the line. For what it's worth, Comedy Central's all-time list, that includes Jewish comics. On the list, Lenny Bruce, number 3. Woody Allen, number 4. Rodney Dangerfield, number 7. Roseanne Barr, number 12. Jerry Seinfeld, Roseanne's at 9, Jerry Seinfeld, 12. Don Rickles, 17. Robert Klein, kid of the 50s, right? 22. Jack Benny, 28. Milton Berle, 29. Gary Shandling, 30. George Burns, 31. Albert Einstein, 32. Except Albert Einstein had a problem if he appeared as Albert Einstein, so he changed his name to Albert Brooks. Andy Kaufman, 33. Buddy Hackett, 34. So that's, for what it's worth, the Comedy Central list. 39, Billy Crystal. 40, Mort Saul. 41, Jon Stewart. 44, Joan Rivers. 45, Richard Lewis. 46, Adam Sandler. 47, Henny Youngman. 51, Louis Black. I think he should be higher on that list. 53, David Brenner. Came from Philadelphia. And in his contract in Las Vegas, he had to have tasty cakes sent daily to him from Philadelphia. Make him happy. Alan King, 55. Gilbert Gottfried, 59. Jackie Mason, 63. Richard Belzer, 64. Shelley Berman, 66. There's Red Buttons. They never held a testimonial for him. That was an old joke. 67, Kevin Pollak. 68, David Tell. 71, Red Buttons. 73, The Waitress, Elaine Boozler. 74, Robert Schimmel. I went to high school with his sister Sandy Schimmel. 77, Paul Reiser. 82, Howie Mandel. 86, Jay Moore. 95, Andrew Dice Clay. 96, Joey Bishop. 97, Sandra Bernhardt. 39 out of the top 100 comedians are Jewish in a country where only 3% of the population is Jewish. Many Jewish comics performed at the Catskills. They were probably just as funny as any on the list. People like Mickey Katz, Joel Gray's father, and Jennifer Gray's grandfather. Groucho Marx once said about Bud Abbott, he was the greatest straight man in comedy. And a thank you to Max and to Freddie. Freddie for telling me stories, and for Max helping me out with this talk. Your turn. I'm done.
Thank you.
Anybody have a